Between 1802 and 2023, 5 American family enterprises extracted $485 billion from taxpayers through military contracts. Not over decades, through every single war America fought, the Civil War, both World Wars, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, same companies, same families, same playbook. This isn't hidden. The government publishes contract awards, profits appear in annual reports. What's remarkable isn't that it happened. It's that the identical pattern repeated across 2 centuries while nobody noticed. If you want to understand how economic incentives shape geopolitical decisions, how private profit intersects with public policy, and why certain industries never face real accountability, subscribe to the Econaut. We examine the structural forces the textbooks ignore and headlines miss. The DuPont family reveals the template every other dynasty would follow. When Eleuthère Irénée DuPont arrived from France in 1800, he brought expertise in gunpowder chemistry and recognized an opportunity. The young United States had just won independence and was expanding westward, requiring explosives for mining, land clearing, and inevitably conflict. He established powder mills along the Brandywine River in Delaware in 1802. Close enough to Philadelphia and Washington for political access, water-powered for production. Remote enough that explosions wouldn't create political consequences. The War of 1812 brought DuPont its first major federal contract, establishing a cycle that would repeat for 2 centuries. Conflict emerges. Government requires explosives at scale. DuPont already possesses manufacturing capacity. They secure the contract, production expands, profits accumulate. War concludes, the infrastructure remains, they wait for the next crisis. The Mexican-American War of 1846 delivered contracts worth approximately $1 million, roughly $35 million today. More valuable than immediate revenue was cementing DuPont's position as the government's preferred supplier, ensuring they'd be first in line when the next conflict arrived. The Civil War transformed DuPont from regional supplier into national industrial power. 4 years of sustained warfare created unprecedented demand. DuPont's facilities operated continuously, producing over 4 million pounds of explosive materials, with federal contracts exceeding $10 million, over $300 million adjusted for inflation. The DuPont family politically opposed abolition, some members privately supported the Confederacy, but they sold exclusively to the Union because that's where the contracts originated. Political conviction proved subordinate to commercial opportunity. After Union victory, DuPont emerged as a patriotic enterprise that helped preserve the nation. World War I elevated DuPont into dynasty status. Before American entry in 1917, they supplied Britain and France with millions of pounds of explosives. When the United States joined, production increased exponentially. DuPont ultimately provided 40% of all Allied explosive materials. Net earnings rose from $5 million in 1914 to $82 million in 1918, over $1 billion today. That's 1,600% in 4 years. After the armistice, war profits didn't disappear. They diversified into chemicals, plastics, synthetic materials. War revenue funded a peacetime industrial empire. World War II brought another surge with cost-plus contracts, meaning government covered all expenses plus guaranteed profit. Korea, Vietnam, Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan, every conflict involved DuPont materials or successor companies. Current DuPont family trust assets exceed $30 billion, 6 generations removed from the founder, still benefiting from explosives sold centuries ago. John D. Rockefeller founded Standard Oil in 1870, and within a decade controlled 90% of American oil refining. When America engaged in military operations, that monopoly became a strategic national asset. The Spanish-American War of 1898 established petroleum as military necessity when the Navy transitioned from coal to oil-powered vessels. Rockefeller supplied the fleet and learned a fundamental lesson. Control the fuel, influence the military. World War I was the first industrial war where oil proved decisive. Although antitrust action had broken up Standard Oil in 1911, Rockefeller maintained control through Exxon, Mobil, Chevron. These entities supplied fuel to American and Allied forces with contracts totaling hundreds of millions. Rockefeller's strategy diverged from DuPont. They didn't limit sales to one side. Standard Oil's German subsidiary continued providing fuel to Germany even after American entry, trading through neutral intermediaries. This wasn't treason, it was business, and it was legal because the corporations were technically separate entities. Profiting from both sides transformed the Rockefellers into America's wealthiest family. John D. became the world's first billionaire. The family diversified into banking, real estate, philanthropy, but petroleum remained foundational. World War II repeated the pattern. Standard Oil of New Jersey faced investigation for trading with Nazi Germany and sharing synthetic rubber patents with IG Farben even after war commenced, potentially extending the conflict. Senator Harry Truman's committee concluded Standard Oil's actions compromised the war effort, yet no prosecutions followed. The company was too strategically important. The military required their fuel. The investigation quietly concluded. Contracts continued. Korea, Vietnam, Gulf War, every conflict consumed oil, and Exxon, Mobil, Chevron provided it. Current Rockefeller family fortune exceeds $11 billion, built on fuel sold to militaries conducting wars. The Morgan banking dynasty represents war financing. J.P. Morgan built his empire in the 1870s, and by 1900 ran America's most powerful financial institution, understanding that governments at war will borrow at any interest rate, because they have no alternative. World War I changed everything. When war erupted in 1914, America remained officially neutral, but American banks led by J.P. Morgan lent over $2 billion to Britain and France, exceeding $50 billion in current dollars. American banks lent money to allies who spent it purchasing from American manufacturers, so capital circulated while profit accumulated at both ends. Those loans made American neutrality mathematically impossible. By 1917, Britain and France owed American banks so extensively that their defeat would trigger a financial crisis. If they lost, they couldn't repay. American banks would collapse. The economy would crater. When President Wilson requested war declaration in April 1917, it wasn't solely about democracy or German aggression. It was protecting American financial interests. Senator George Norris stated explicitly, "We are going into war upon the command of gold. We are about to put the dollar sign on the American flag." He voted against war. Congress voted for it. J.P. Morgan's loans were secured by American military power. After the war, Morgan profited again. Germany owed reparations to the Allies. The Allies owed money to America. Morgan arranged loans allowing Germany to pay reparations, which the Allies used to repay American loans. The Dawes Plan in 1924 and Young Plan in 1929, both structured by Morgan bankers, refinanced billions in war debt while Morgan collected millions in fees. World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Every conflict required financing. Morgan banks, eventually merged into JP Morgan Chase, remained involved underwriting government debt and financing defense contractors. Family fortune exceeds $30 billion, built on lending money for wars and collecting interest while soldiers paid the cost in blood. The Lockheed brothers founded their aircraft company in 1912, and by World War I were building planes for military contracts. Aviation represented the future, and companies establishing themselves early positioned for a century of profits. World War II was the breakthrough when aircraft became decisive. Lockheed built the P-38 Lightning fighter, over 10,000 produced, and the Hudson bomber, over 2,800 produced, with contracts worth hundreds of millions. Lockheed's innovation wasn't just building aircraft, they built relationships with the Pentagon. They hired former military officers as executives, located factories in congressional districts where representatives needed jobs for constituents, made themselves politically untouchable. After World War II, the Cold War maintained contract flow. Lockheed's strategy remained consistent: build adequate products, underestimate costs, secure the contract, then request additional funding, because the project proved more complex than anticipated. The Pentagon always paid, because canceling meant admitting waste. The C-5 Galaxy transport plane exemplifies this. Initial 1965 contract, $2.1 billion. Actual cost by delivery, $5.3 billion, 150% over budget. Did Lockheed lose money? No. Cost plus contract meant they received all costs plus profit. Today, Lockheed Martin is the world's largest defense contractor with $65 billion revenue in 2023, 90% from government contracts. The F-35 fighter jet represents the most expensive weapons program in history. Original budget $233 billion, current estimate over $1.7 trillion, 7 times over budget. Lockheed is getting paid for every cost overrun because the Pentagon can't cancel. Too much invested, too many jobs dependent, too many congressional districts relying on the program. Halliburton was founded in 1919 as an oil services company, but to recognize that infrastructure, whether for petroleum or military, was lucrative. By World War II, they were constructing bases, airfields, ports for the military. The pattern was straightforward. Military needs infrastructure rapidly. Halliburton has expertise and equipment. They receive no-bid contracts because there's insufficient time for competitive bidding. Cost plus contracts meant they couldn't lose money. Vietnam was larger scale through subsidiary Brown & Root. George Brown, the founder, was a major donor to Lyndon B. Johnson, whose political career was partly funded by Brown. When Johnson became president, Brown & Root received massive Vietnam infrastructure contracts. The 1991 Gulf War brought Halliburton back when Dick Cheney was Secretary of Defense. After the war, Cheney left government and became Halliburton CEO in 1995, running the company until 2000, when he became vice president. Then came Iraq and Afghanistan. Halliburton, through subsidiary KBR, received contracts exceeding $40 billion with no bid, cost plus pricing. Pentagon. Inspector General investigations found billions in waste and overcharges, meals never served, fuel deliveries that never occurred, construction never completed. From 2003 to 2008, Halliburton's government contracts increased 400%. Stock price tripled. When Cheney left office in 2009, he still held Halliburton stock options worth millions. The pattern across all 5 companies is identical. First, position before the war. DuPont built explosive capacity during peacetime. Rockefeller monopolized oil refining. Morgan constructed banking relationships. Lockheed maintained military contracts. Halliburton developed infrastructure expertise. When war started, they were ready while competitors weren't. Second, secure the initial contract. Government requires supplies immediately with no time for competitive bidding, so pre-positioned companies receive no-bid contracts justified by national security. Once you hold the first contract, subsequent ones come easier. Third, cost plus pricing eliminates all risk. The contractor bills government for all costs plus guaranteed percentage profit, so if costs overrun, government pays. The incentive is maximizing cost, not minimizing them. Fourth, exceed the budget. Every major weapon system in the last 50 years has come in over budget, the F-35 7 times over, the Zumwalt destroyer 3 times over. This isn't incompetence, it's the business model. Underbid to secure the contract, then revise estimates upward because government can't cancel after they've already invested. Fifth, hire the regulators. When military officers retire, they join defense contractors, ensuring that people awarding contracts maintain relationships that benefit them later. Sixth, lobby for more war. Defense contractors spend millions lobbying Congress, donate to campaigns, fund think tanks producing papers advocating military intervention. When Iraq was debated in 2002, defense contractors funded organizations producing intelligence reports supporting invasion, paid for advertisements, hired former generals to appear on news shows advocating war. Seventh, diversify the profit. War profits don't remain in weapons. DuPont used explosive profits to build a chemical empire. Rockefeller used oil profits to acquire banks and real estate. Morgan used war lending profits to finance peacetime industries. DuPont's total revenue from military contracts since 1802, over $50 billion inflation adjusted. Rockefeller Company's fuel sales since 1898, over $100 billion. Morgan Bank's interest and fees from war financing, over $75 billion. Lockheed Martin and predecessors since 1917, over $200 billion. Halliburton since 1942, over $60 billion. Total, these 5 companies extracted over $485 billion from American taxpayers through war contracts. That's documented, publicly available contract values not including indirect profits, stock price increases, real estate purchase with war profits, industries built using war capital. If you included that, the number exceeds $1 trillion. That money came from taxpayers. Every dollar paid to DuPont for explosives was taken from American workers through taxes. Every dollar paid to Halliburton for logistics came from deficit spending that future generations will repay. These aren't normal business profits. These are public funds transferred to private hands, justified by war. Is this still happening? Yes, right now. In 2023, the US military budget was $816 billion. The 5 largest defense contractors, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, received over $200 billion in contracts, 25% of the entire defense budget flowing to 5 companies. The F-35 program built by Lockheed has suppliers in 45 states intentionally, meaning 90 senators have constituents employed by the program. Voting against the F-35 means voting against jobs in your state, so Congress continues funding it, even though it's 7 times over budget, years behind schedule, with over 800 documented defects. $485 billion could have funded free college for every American student for 20 years, constructed high-speed rail connecting every major city, funded universal healthcare for a decade, rebuilt every bridge and road in the country, or funded cancer research for a century. Instead, it purchased explosives, fuel, weapons, logistics for wars. Some necessary, many not. Vietnam could have concluded years earlier, but defense contractors lobbied to continue. Iraq was sold on intelligence partly produced by contractor-funded think tanks. Afghanistan became a 20-year occupation, partly because contractors earned billions rebuilding what we destroyed. The profit motive didn't create these wars, but it made them longer and more expensive than necessary. Despite evidence of overcharging, fraud, profiteering, no one faces prosecution. DuPont was investigated for explosive monopoly practices in the 1930s. Nothing happened. Standard Oil was broken up for monopoly, but the Rockefellers retained the wealth and companies eventually reunited. Morgan banks were investigated for war profiteering after World War I. No prosecutions. Halliburton was investigated for overcharging in Iraq, paid a fine, kept the contracts, continued profiting. The pattern persists because these companies are too important to prosecute. The military depends on them, Congress depends on them for jobs, the economy depends on them so they're protected even when they violate law. 5 families, 5 companies, 150 years. Every major American war. Position before the war, secure the contracts. Overrun the costs, hire the regulators. Lobby for more, profit while others die. This isn't conspiracy. This is documented history. The contracts are public, the profits are recorded, the pattern is undeniable, and it's still happening right now. If this changed how you see military spending, if you finally understand that war represents a business model, then you're starting to see the structural forces that shape policy. 5 families, billions in profit, built on wars that killed millions. The contracts are public record. The pattern has repeated for 150 years. They profit, we pay, soldiers die. And the system continues because it's designed to